Praise the Lord, saints and friends. This is Elder Adrian Heyman, bringing you another session on the journey through the book of Genesis. Where we left off, Cain had killed his brother. He thought that, of course, the Lord didn't know, and to his own detriment, we find out that God knows everything. And so then God meted out the penalty. And it's very interesting that he didn't think afterwards about killing his brother. But it's like how many people think. You do this horrendous crime, this horrendous action, and then when the penalty is given to you, it's too much. It's just too much. It's too much. So it didn't start in the 1950s. It didn't start in the 1800s. It was right there with the first murder. Even though he was the one who killed his brother, the penalty for him to be essentially a fugitive and a vagabond, and that he couldn't even farm right, because essentially the ground would be cursed. It would not give up anything. Not the same curse that Adam and Eve received after leaving the Garden of Eden, but a different curse specifically for him. At least Adam and Eve, with work, could get something out of the ground. Cain, that was to stop right then and there. But God is merciful. After Cain said his punishment would be too great to bear, then you want to see in verse number 15. So when everybody tells you that God is this wicked person, God or being, that God rains thunderbolts down all the time, we've seen now in two instances. In Adam and Eve's instance, whereas he could have slain them right there. They had already lost their fellowship from God, but he gave them an avenue that eons later, centuries later, would lead to the salvation of mankind. And now he gives Cain a bit of mercy. And here he is, verse number 15, chapter 4 of Genesis. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. Now, I'm not sure how vengeance could be taken, unless it means you wipe out your entire family, means that essentially the type of death you receive would be horrendous. Don't know what it meant, but I don't think anyone wanted to find out. And so the idea here was God's mercy. Even though Cain had no mercy for Abel, God had mercy for Cain. Then it said, and the Lord set a mark upon Cain. So in order to prevent people from unknowingly killing or essentially thinking that they didn't know anything about Cain's mark or Cain was supposed to be preserved. Now think about that. Cain preserved. Cain was to be preserved after he unalived Abel. But yet God preserved Cain. Now, you would think that that's just unfair. How can a person get away with murder? I mean, think about it now. When someone murders someone else, the relatives want vengeance. And I can understand that. I'm not saying that we, as saints of God, should do that. But I understand why relatives of a particular person who has been slain would want to exact punishment upon the one who killed them. So you're talking about parole. The Lord put Cain on parole, so to speak. And think about it this way. we were, maybe we didn't kill anyone, maybe we didn't steal or beat up anyone, but we were dead to rights, gone. We had no right for any salvation for us. In fact, our basic tendency is to reject God, is to be away from God. For men love darkness rather than light. And Jesus is the light. But yet the Lord not only put us on parole, but we get a chance to be acquitted of our crime, of being full of sin. And remember, it doesn't have to be a horrendous thing like killing somebody. Remember, Adam just ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's what he was punished with. His cells began to die. And even though in life, the cells that we have, they can be replaced. At some time in our lives, the rate of cell death becomes more than the rate of cell life or cell manufacture. But because of Jesus, we have a chance that after this body, the skin worms, after they eat this flesh, yet in my body, the one that God will make for us anew, we will see God. But Cain, as bad as his sin was, the Lord put a mark on him that everyone would know that he is to be preserved, because he was essentially God's person. Not God's person in terms of spreading the gospel or spreading the good word or spreading the good news or spreading anything about God, but that God would hold anyone and everyone accountable for harming Cain. Verse 16. I want to read this very slowly. And it says, and Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. Now think about that. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. Now, understanding that the Lord is not only omniscient, he knows all, but he's also omnipresent. How could you leave from the presence of the Lord if the Lord is everywhere? And here's the key. It says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, which means there are places where the Lord does not act. The Lord, it doesn't say that he's not there, but when Jesus was born, God was in him because he was God. Didn't mean that God wasn't in other places in the world at this time, but he was centralized in Jesus. That does not mean that he could not continue what he was doing in other areas of not only this globe, but the universe. But his plan was being centralized in the person of Jesus Christ. When Cain left the place where his family was and where his brother Abel had, until he killed him, had herded flocks, Cain left the place where the presence of God was centralized. Like, I'll give you a good example. The U.S., the government of the U.S., can be seen most in any state. It could be in Wyoming, Texas, Hawaii, Alaska, California, New York, Maine, Virginia, Florida, and so on. Government covers all these areas, but the power of the government is centralized in Washington, D.C. It's centralized there. Now, the centralization of God's power or God's presence was what Cain left. And to be honest, that's not that much different than us. God can protect us, God can keep us, God can watch us, but God, he does not keep anyone that does not want to be with him. So you can leave from the presence of God. You can leave it. Doesn't mean that God can't be right there. He's really within earshot for anyone that wants to call upon him. But if you don't want to be in his presence, you don't have to be in his presence. But it's your choice. It's your choice to do so. Now, whether it was a choice or not, I really don't think it was a choice. But it does show his fall. That from being in the presence of God and where God would talk to him and speak with him even about his own insecurities, his own anger, or his own feeling of rejection. If you notice, God never speaks to Cain ever again, nor to his descendants, which then marks a descent of the spiritual condition of the line of Cain. And it started right when he left the presence of God after killing his brother. Don't know if he was able to say goodbye to his mother and his father. But it is also possible that at the time he left, another was to be born to Adam and Eve. Let's keep going. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Two things. There are those who believe that the land of Nod is a place where your first witches dwelt. There are some that pretty much think that. They believe that. But it doesn't say that in the Bible. That may be in the book of Enoch, I don't know. But the book of Enoch is not a canonical book. It means it's not Bible canon. It's not accepted as the word of God. So we can't use that book to try to think of different people or things or giants or whatever that may be in this particular time. It just said that he went into the land of Nod, wherever the land of Nod was. All it said, it was the east of Eden. It was in the east of Eden, wherever Eden was. Now, as I said before, people may be trying to look for the Garden of Eden. They'll never find it. Why not? Because God doesn't want Eden to be found. Because even if you did find it, there is a question of how can you get there? Because he said he put cherubim there, guardians, angelic guardians, and then placed a sword that turned every which way to block the way or to keep the way of the tree of life. You can't get to it. And I do firmly believe that God at length took Eden out of the earth, placed it in heaven. So therefore, he was able to transplant the tree of life, which Adam could not get to but eventually we will. But in terms of the land of Nod, I'm not making any conjectures. There are those who feel this way. Remember, I talked with somebody who she was a guest, and I was told that this person believed in the land of Nod, and that this is where witches had originated from. Again, I cannot and will not try to argue that for or against. But here in the Bible, it just gives you a particular way or place where Cain dwelt. And in verse 17, here comes another thing. And Cain knew his wife. Where did Cain's wife come? That's a puzzle. Now, we got to remember, this does not mean that immediately after Cain left the presence of God, that all these things happened. It could have taken a while for him to get there, taken him a while for him to settle down, taken him a while to get acclimated to where he was. So instead of trying to think of these esoteric theories of, well, there may have been another civilization there. Maybe there was one before God. Maybe that wasn't in Eden. If the Bible doesn't say it, I'm not going to go ahead and okay it. The only reasonable explanation is that in time, possibly one of Adam's other children, because remember, after he had Seth, he also had other sons and daughters. Any of those could have wandered in the direction of Cain. And it doesn't say how long Cain lived. It just says that he went out from the presence of the Lord, dwelt in the land of Nod. And then it says, and Cain knew his wife. Means he had sexual relations with someone who had to come from Adam's seed. Possibly Seth's. Remember, for both Adam and for Seth, after the particular person who was to continue the genealogy that was tracked here, after they had that particular person, it says for both Adam and for Seth, they both had other sons and daughters. How many of them? Don't know. If the time of pregnancy is still what it is today, which is 9 months, and if Adam has lived 900 years, you can get a picture as to how many children Adam could have. Even if he stopped having children and Eve stopped having children halfway through his life, stop at age 400, you still have a chance to have a lot of children, both he and Seth, his son. So one of those women may have traversed the distance between where Adam was and Seth was to where Cain was. And of these descendants, Cain was able to get a wife. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. This is not the same Enoch that is of the line of Seth. This is a different Enoch. It's because people have the same name, saints of God, doesn't mean it's the same person. It's a different person with a different lineage. Enoch that we know of comes from the line of Seth. The Enoch that's stated here was Cain's son. What happened? He builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Again, just being very careful about this. This is over a period of years. And the city does not mean bustling superhighways, does not mean a split level housing, does not mean walls and everything. It just means that it's a place where he was able to build a house. Maybe he was helped to build a few houses around, and they called that dwelling place a city. Could have been only 10 people in it. May have grown to 100 or 1,000. Remember, people lived a long period of time during this particular era in the life of man. 100 years old, that was nothing. You would think, well, how could you die so young at 100 years old? 200, 300. You'll see that most of the people here had lived, at least if you looked at Seth's line, you can figure the same thing possibly for Cain's line. 700 years at least. There are people that have dozens of children, and they only live to 50 and 60, depending upon the circumstance. So we're not going to see how hard this may be, because essentially, number one, Cain's wife had to come from Adam and Eve. Well, isn't that incest? Well, they essentially, everything was pure at that time. Incest wasn't going to cause much of a problem at that particular point until now. Now we can't do that. Things have happened. Remember, things cannot be judged on a 21st century mind. I think even our bodies are reacting differently. We have to understand that our bodies are not the same as it was in the time of Cain and Abel and Seth. I'd say that we're supermen or we're inferior men. But if you think about it, if they could live to all of these astounding ages, and if we even reach to 100 years old, we're like, boy, you have lived a long time. Then you know that something has happened, not just to the body, but to our environment and everything else that takes place that causes us to die out sooner than what we used to. If these figures are correct, and there's no way of saying that these figures are wrong, if you believe the Word of God, of course. But here, the narrative gets off of Cain and begins to deal with his descendants. And we'll deal with that next time. The land of Nod, away from the presence of God. So he's not even speaking about God. His mind is not even on God. It's away from him. He rejected God when he rejected God's advice and killed Abel. So now that he was well known as the one that you could not kill because God had preserved him, put a mark on him. But that didn't make his heart any better. Don't leave from the presence of the Lord. It's not necessarily a specific place, but it is a specific attitude, a specific mindset, a specific thought or frame of mind. That if you leave his presence, you leave where he's touching you, where you can feel him, where you can converse with them, and you feel then that you have no communication with them. You do that, you're in a bad state. And I truly believe that Cain and his generations, his descendants, kept away from God. And that essentially is going to be of some importance once we begin to read further in the narrative of the people that came before the flood. Remember, the flood hasn't happened yet. So we're just now dealing with the genealogy of Cain. Hopefully this helps to understand the situation. If you don't understand it, please ask. I'll try to give you as much as I can, but please don't ask me questions like, well, why was man made? You ask God that question. Maybe he'll give you the answer, but it doesn't say it in the Word of God. So instead of hanging ourselves and just making our minds screwy, asking a question that God hasn't answered for us, then just try to live for God. If you can do that, then God may give you the answer that you need. May God bless you. May he keep you. Take care of yourselves. Probably do one more of these sessions before I deal with the word diner, which will be coming at 10 p.m. Love you. God bless you in Jesus' name.